Hi, everybody. I just finished up a phenomenal interview with my friend Frank Wilczek, who is a really unbelievable, unparalleled intellect in my mind and many physicists' minds, but also in the public's mind. He does a tremendous amount of engagement with the public, and his new book, Fundamentals, 10 Keys to Reality, is now out. Here's the cover. Here's the actual book is down here. Don't worry. I read the whole book, and I've done now 2 podcasts with him about it. But this is my 3rd podcast with him total, if you're keeping score at home. And we got into a great deal of his insights into really, as he calls the book, the nature of reality and what it's predicated on. The foundations of the universe and its comprehensibility are really keys to understanding what the limits of human intelligence are, what the potential augmentation of artificial intelligence might mean for humanity, and also prospects for things that transcend the laws of physics, such as religion, alien life, and other things that you'll hear about. You'll also hear about his advice to his former self, his answer to my famous monolith question, and also his ethical will, which you won't want to miss. He promised me that last time when we spoke about a beautiful question back in November, and now he answered it today. But you only hear that if you sign up for my mailing list at briankeating.com. I'm a little concerned about the powers of big tech, and people are getting rightfully concerned about technology, perhaps controlling our access to the fans and the audience out there. So I do want to encourage you to sign up for my mailing list at briankeating.com. You'll get advice for life from not only from Frank, but from folks like Jim Simons, and from even people that you haven't heard podcasts from yet, such as Avi Loeb, who recorded a podcast with me just last week. I also have Julian Barber coming up on the podcast. So please subscribe, like, and do all those things for this podcast to keep it going. But do subscribe to my newsletter if you want to hear the answers to the thrilling 3 questions that I ask all of my guests, including Frank Wilczek, which is delayed back in November, but have no fear. You will get those answers right here if you subscribe at briankeating.com. Just go there. It takes a second. And I won't spam you. I'll send out about 1 email a week with the advice, tips, tricks, and things that are going about and percolating in the multiverse of minds that I'm connecting together in the spirit of pandemic podcasts. So for now, sit back and enjoy this wonderful, fun, raucous at times interview with the brilliant, effervescent, and imaginative Frank Wilczek.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Okay, welcome everybody to this episode of the Into the Impossible podcast. I am your fearful host, Dr. Brian Keating, in this time of pandemic podcasting. And we're so fortunate to be joined today by a friend, a real legend, and such a generous person as Frank Wilczek. He's given a lot of his time to this podcast, and he's one of the most popular guests that we've had. So it's quite fitting that we kind of return the favor in our small little way and have him back on the occasion of his phenomenal new book called Fundamentals. And we'll be talking a lot about that today. Frank, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling pretty good.
You've had a lot of great publicity on this wonderful new book we'll be talking about, Fundamentals.
It's been very gratifying. It really has been very gratifying. You know, it's among all my book experiences, this has been unique. It's really been. I think I've been supplying something that people really needed, even if they didn't know it.
Well, I see you as
wanted. I should say wanted, not needed. Wanted, even if they didn't realize it. Yeah.
Well, in this case, I see you as having a tremendous amount of courage. You've always been a courageous physicist and a physicist with style and an actual sort of, I would say, a brand which is extremely high quality, but somehow with extremely high quantity. And I want to get into that first. What's a day in the life of Frank Wilczek like? Now you talked about, in your previous books, you talked about your devotion to your wife and Betsy, and then you've talked about your kids. And this is the first book you talk about your grandchild, which is so exciting. Congratulations.
That's the first opportunity.
Yeah, that's right. How have things changed for you?
I didn't hold that in reserve.
Yeah. The new release came out timed with the book launch. I actually had that with my twins. They came out a week before my book came out. But Frank, how has your style changed since becoming a grandfather, or has it changed? Is your workflow, is your daily routine changed at all?
Well, not so much because of having a grandchild. That's been a blessing, and it's subtly altered my view of the world, I guess, or not so subtly. Viewing him learning and establishing a self and a model of the world was very illuminating, and went very much into fundamentals.
Right.
But it hasn't affected my daily life in any very direct way. What's really affected my daily life is the pandemic, of course, which has meant that the wandering lifestyle that I had somehow fallen into for the past 4 or 5 years suddenly stopped. and whereas I was moving every few months to different parts of the world, and that was kind of an adventure, and I made a lot of new friends, and it was fun. It was not conducive to a kind of reflective life and sustained creative work. And now I've resumed my style, almost like I'm going back to graduate school. It's been really an extraordinary thing. I've completed the book, which was kind of, a struggle, a troubled pregnancy for quite a while. And I got to relax and actually give birth to the book. And I've gone back to school in some ways. I've been reading more, both physics and more broadly. And I took up juggling. I've been exercising. I lost now almost 20 pounds.
Yeah. I
feel younger than I've felt for a very long time. More energetic, and I've also been learning things. I've decided, that I could get serious about learning machine learning, and really dirty I've for many years now enjoyed interacting with computer through Mathematica and this kind of physics modeling and things like that. But it hasn't. I've been interested in machine learning for a long time. In fact, in the history of machine learning, an important event was a workshop at Santa Barbara in the 80s, and I was there and participated in it, not as one of the central members certainly, but kind of as an interested quasi-spectator, and I wrote to some of the postdocs. And now it's some of those same ideas about neural nets have become deep learning and have become very, very powerful and impressive.
Yeah.
So I decided it's time to get back in touch with that and get up to date. And when I do something like that, I really mean it. So I'm learning how to use the tools and doing model problems and things. Right. So well, going back to school in that sense. But also I've been carrying through a research program that is, I think, very interesting and promising in many directions.
Yeah,
so I want to. That's more like what I've always done, But I've just had more time to do it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I made a vow that anybody who comes out of this pandemic with a six-pack, I'm going to be quite upset with. And so you might add six-pack to Nobel laureate. But speaking of Nobel laureates, your fellow laureate Kip Thorne keeps giving me the cold shoulder to come on the podcast. I've had on your colleague Ray Weiss. I've had on Barry Barish, and he keeps saying, I cannot come on just now. Please contact me in a couple weeks because it's the most productive I've ever been. I'm turning down every opportunity to go on podcasts, and I'm just focusing on work. And it's been one of the best things that ever happened to me in a work sense. Obviously,
what he's up to. I wonder what he's up to.
Yeah, well, they're writing a book. Barry and Ray and Kip are writing a book about LIGO, and I think he's also working on other projects related to general relativity and so forth. But I do want to get into your newfound peregrinations into the world of artificial intelligence. It's funny, this book really goes on a journey from natural intelligence through your contributions all the way up to artificial intelligence. Maybe we'll start there. You talk a lot about things in the book, and it was funny because I was setting up to do this interview. I had to do one of these CAPTCHAs, these CAPTCHAs where you have to prove that you're a human being, but actually you're proving that you're not a robot, which are not artificial intelligence, which is the opposite of the Turing test, right? Turing test is you want to prove that a general artificial intelligence can replicate. So I had on Noam Chomsky this past year, or last year now, and he thinks this whole notion of can machines think is as outlandish as Turing ever did, which is that it's sort of nonsensical, it's almost semantic. You put a lot of faith in it, and you put a lot of emphasis on it, rather, in the book. And I'm wondering, what are your current thoughts?
It's not a matter of it's to me, it's not a matter of faith. It's a hypothesis which seems very, very difficult to avoid. Francis Crick, the great molecular biologist, wrote a book called The Astonishing Hypothesis around this very idea, and his formulation was a little bit different, but basically it's the idea that mind emerges from matter, and that's certainly been the working hypothesis of neurobiology and understanding nervous systems and signaling and so forth in the brain, and so far it hasn't hit any showstoppers. We also, as physicists, know that when we do delicate experiments, we have to vibrations and shielding from radio waves and shielding from temperature variations and moisture or stray graduate students wandering through the lab
or theorists.
But one thing we've never had to correct for is the possibility that people thinking about it would affect the results. And to me, anyone who thinks that there are souls or that there are separate entities that are not described by the physical laws we know, show me. Here's an open invitation to devise an experiment with very, very delicate instruments and show the influence of mind on matter.
But we would, when you're...
Or just to show that the accuracy of experiments somehow runs out because there's a lot of cosmic noise from the force that's carrying all these thought waves. It's just so it would be pretty astonishing. There doesn't seem to be anything resembling the idea of a thought wave that can affect matter on the one hand, and on the other hand, as I mentioned, so far neurobiology has succeeded in understanding more and more about signaling, memory, all the functions that go into human information processing, and also just the basic fact that thought seems to be rooted in brains. When you damage brains, you damage thought, and so forth. And then on the third hand, we've learned to make minds with computers that do very impressive things, all the way from perception now, where they can start to identify objects in images, to, of course, playing Go and chess better than humans. Those were once thought to be the sort of pinnacles of human intelligence. And in that case, there's no question that the minds have emerged from matter. In fact, we designed them. We designed them based on the principles of quantum mechanics and logic to do these things. And so, on all those grounds, I think it's very hard. It would be to me, it would be astonishing if Crick's astonishing hypothesis were not true. Yeah,
but one thing that interests me is not whether or not, computers, as you point out, like AlphaZero and so forth, can beat humans at the game of chess or at the game of Go. Can they ever create the game of chess or create the game of Go? And this gets at my pet peeve lately, which is that I don't care about artificial intelligence. I want artificial wisdom. Wisdom is creating chess.
Yeah, well,
knowledge is beating the human at chess. So what do you think about the prospects for a computer to create a game that would be pleasurable for human beings, not just beat us at it?
Well, that remains to be seen. And I think a great challenge, which is mentioned in the book, and I think is a very important one, is to make machines unhappy, make machines want to explore, to be motivated, to go out and not just wait for instructions, but to go out and explore, do things. Now there are hints of that. I mean, there's something called reinforcement learning, which is a strategy whereby a computer is encouraged to explore as well as exploit. So to explore and make mistakes so that it learns what works and what doesn't work. At present, that's mostly implemented in very limited domains of learning how to play games well, or in robotics, learning how to move around in simple situations. But I don't think there's any barrier of principle to, and having computers watch humans and watch what they do and watch what they like and learn what their motivations are, and then to take over some of them. Take over, or not take over is maybe an unfortunate phrase, but to adopt some of them,
right?
And use them. And derive pleasure from them. And the other thing is, when you talk about creativity, it's creeping up on us. But you may have seen things like this person does not exist, where you click, you can get photographic in style images of people that don't exist, that are very convincing, very photorealistic, and so these are creations, and there are also programs now that can take an image and turn it into the style of Van Gogh, or turn it into the style of Picasso at different periods, and okay, they're not quite there yet, but they can do a lot better than I can. That's for sure. And then if you leave them to their own devices, they have their own style, which is kind of phantasmagoric. You can look inside images that deep neural nets are making, and they have a weird charm, and certainly creative in the sense that no human artist does anything like that.
Right.
When
I think about that, I mean, my father used to say, one promising avenue might be to replicate how we learn things, which is by pain avoidance, right? So you could actually damage the transistors, and they make a wrong choice. I wonder if they would actually come about learning, but I always point out, and you talk about this a lot in the book, that what science has taught us is tremendous amount of knowledge. And I see this book as helping us synthesize, in the sense that Isaac Newton, as you describe in the book, would do analysis and then synthesis. But I wonder, can you ever broach that blood-brain barrier between knowledge and wisdom. In other words, I see a lot of issues with the fact that we trust scientists and we say scientist so-and-so has a Nobel Prize and therefore we should trust them outside of their domain of expertise.
That's not a good reason to trust anybody. I've had experience with Nobel Prize winners, and they're a very odd lot, and some are better than others. Yes. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm actually working on a book where I'm going to synthesize all the Nobel laureates I've spoken to, including you. So look for that coming out this year. But in reality, I see this conflation of knowledge and wisdom, and I see your book as giving ammunition and giving a positive way to people to think about the limits of knowledge, but also inspire them. It's your I would say it's your least technical of all the books you've written. I think you've written 4 books.
By far.
It's the most accessible. It's the most awe-inspiring and wonder-inspiring. It's full of jokes. It's full of little pithy footnotes, which, usually they say, footnotes are like receiving a phone call as you're kissing your wife or something. But now it's our husband or whatever.
I insisted that the footnotes not be numbered.
Yes, I love them. They're asynchronous. They're asynchronous.
And also that they just appear right there, so you don't have to thumb through the book to get and the footnotes are not citations.
Right.
I don't think there's a single citation in the footnotes, but kind of side remarks, jokes, as you say. And
it's very accessible. It's very readable for the average lay person, and but also for the technically minded person. You have some red meat or tofu, whatever you want to call it, for the vegetarians that may be listening. In the back, you've got your Feynman diagrams. Don't worry, there's plenty of technical goodness there. Let me start with your current thinking about really the fundamentals. What are the most fundamental fundamentals? You start off with space, with time, with experience, with genes. What is there? As George Orwell said, all animals are equal. Some are more equal than others. Is there? Is anything as fundamental? Everything is as equally fundamental, but is there something more fundamental?
Well, in order to have a clear discussion of this question, we have to have a clear discussion of what fundamental means, and fundamental can mean a lot of different things. It means a very different thing to an evangelical Christian than it means in the context that I'm using it. What I mean by fundamentals, for purposes of fundamentals 10 keys to reality, is basic principles that explain a lot, but that can't be explained in terms of anything else. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, the second law of thermodynamics is a very insightful, profound principle that tells you a lot about how the world works, but it's not fundamental in my sense, because we can understand it on the basis of atomic structure and concepts of probability and the mechanical view of the world, if you like, broadly considered. We can see how it arises. Cosmology also comes into it, actually, because you have to understand why we happen to find low entropy states all over the place. But that's that's another issue. Anyway, but so what I mean by fundamental is basic principles about how the world works that cannot be explained in terms of more basic principles. And the fact that there are such things and that there are just a small number of them that you can survey is a profound, profound discovery that in itself. And then spelling out exactly what they are is also interesting. Mm-hmm. But the most profound thing is that there are such a few principles that you can just like Einstein said, the most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it's comprehensible. Or what he actually said is that I think it was in German originally, but a pretty good translation would be the comprehensibility of the world is a miracle.
And yet we have plenty of people wanting to make it comprehensible. I think when I read the book, I come across, first of all, it's not simply touting accomplishments and so forth that you personally made, although you have made contributions to this. When you decide that a problem is worth your attention, I mean, it seems like you've stored in some memory bank in your brain the fact that machine learning is interesting, and you happen to be at this, epochal conference in Santa Barbara, et cetera. So what makes you decide that it's time to write a book, or it's time to pick up a new project and perhaps leave, particle physics QCD behind for cosmology and dark matter? How do you decide that? What is that? Yeah. Is there a rubric, or it's just whatever happens to interest you?
Well, it's somewhere in between. I mean, there's certainly an element of playfulness. I mean, I like to say my operating system is think, play, repeat. So I think about something, then I play around with the ideas, and then think about it again and repeat and see if they get better. But I guess there are two basic factors plus a third kind of ingredient that goes into this process. So the basic factors are the importance of a problem and my perception that I think I can do something about it. So there are some problems that are. But then the third thing I wanted to say is you have to, a lot of weight there is being put on the word important. How do you decide what's important? Okay, so things can be important in different ways. Things can be important if they're fundamental, as we discussed. Things can be important if they have the possibility of doing useful things in the world, and we can allow a very broad definition of useful, like pushing the frontiers of knowledge in some way, or making something observable that was only latent about the world, to me is important. And then there's a third thing, which is just making things more beautiful, is more aesthetic, that improving the description of the world. If I perceive flaws here and there, that's something that I've often, perceived flaws or gaps in our understanding of the world. So that's the third. So that's kind of the third factor, which you might say jokingly is irritation. If something irritates me, that's important, important, addressable, and irritating. Those are the three axes.
All right. Well, we've got a note. That's a keynote for this talk. Tag. It has to be important, interesting, and irritating. Right? The three I's, was it? But I want to ask you something. When you came up with axions, I mean, axions aren't particularly beautiful, except in the sense that they might solve a problem. So they're not beautiful in the direct sense that your equations are. It's more important that they're beautiful than that they're right. Because
I don't agree with that. The equations are quite beautiful. They turn out to be when you boil it down. And the original model implementations were not particularly beautiful, and to this day, there's no really beautiful derivation of the basic principles of axion physics. They are tied up in questions of unification, where we just don't know enough detail to pin it all down. But if you do kind of abstract away that, you can get a very beautiful set of equations, which are kind of a minimal extension of Maxwell's equations, to include one extra scalar field. And now that I think about it, I never thought about it this way, but it's like, in a way, it's like Brans-Dicke theory, which is a famous extension of general relativity to include an extra light scalar. But this is much better motivated and much better, and I think the equations are more beautiful. And it's not just me that thinks that; nature thinks it. It turns out that these very equations govern the behavior of certain states of matter in a very profound sense. They are the effective theories of low energy, with different names on the symbols and different values of the parameters, but the same equations, they govern the behavior of low energy excitations and the interactions of certain materials with matter. The so-called topological insulators, in fact, are examples of Axion electrodynamics. And I'm very proud that I wrote a paper back in the 80s, I believe, called Two Applications of Axion Electrodynamics. And in that paper, you will find the equations that govern topological insulators, even though I didn't know anything about topological insulators. Nobody, they were still not even a gleam in the eye of anybody. But the equations have a life of their own.
When we look at,
they're very beautiful equations.
Yeah. When we look at,
and also another aspect of it. So I'm sorry, I'm getting exercised because you said that axions aren't beautiful.
I just said the problem of spontaneous symmetry. I mean, obviously, the most beautiful thing is perfect symmetry, right? So they don't have perfect symmetry.
When I was first thinking about these things, I really didn't anticipate that there would be an important connection to cosmology.
Right.
And yet it turns out that the equations are, again, there's more in them than we knew, and it turns out that very plausibly the axions make up the dark matter that cosmologists need, and we'll see.
Right, we'll see. The reason I said it's not beautiful, I just said the underlying symmetry is broken, and in fact, I think most people equate perfect symmetry with perfect beauty. So that's the only reason I'm saying that you were guided by. Yeah.
Yes. Well, but it's broken in a very, very particular way.
Right.
So the way that it's broken is, it's. I would say, yes, it's broken. It's a broken symmetry, so it's an imperfect symmetry. But I would say, it's an opportunity to expand your concept of symmetry, so that nature gives you an opportunity to expand your mind by expanding your concept of what a symmetry means, from the vulgar idea that it has to be perfect to the idea that it can be sort of violated in a very particular way. But let me not let that go, though, because it's actually also true of asymptotic freedom. Asymptotic freedom, scale invariance is a possible symmetry of the world, that the laws could look the same if you made everything bigger, and that's definitely not true of gravity. It's definitely not true of other laws, but it's almost true of the equations of QCD, that they're scale invariant, and that was really one of the important clues that led us to those equations, was to try to get as close to that symmetry as we can. And asymptotic freedom shows the asymptotic is that symmetry appears more and more clearly as you go to higher and higher energy and shorter distances. So it's another kind of symmetry that's never fully realized, but is violated in a very structured way and can be fully revealed kind of as a limiting perspective, a limiting behavior.
Right.
So symmetry, So I find it really delightful and even more beautiful when you have an expanded concept of symmetry that can be applied in new ways.
Right.
And we can there are other examples. But broken symmetry is both. I say broken symmetry is not simply the absence of symmetry. You can have approximate symmetry, you can have spontaneously broken symmetry, you can have anomalous symmetry, you can have symmetry broken by asymptotic symmetry. So symmetry has been a dominant motif or dominant theme of especially 20th century physics, not just because it's sometimes completely realized, but because it has all these possibilities for fruitful generalization. And nature likes it. Nature likes them. That's, it would have been very hard for people to dream of them, but nature led us to them.
Right. I always point out there's a famous study where they take the most handsome man in the world. I was busy that day, so they took Brad Pitt. They took Brad Pitt and they take his face and they cut it down the middle, and then they reflect the right side onto the left side, and he's grotesque, even more than he normally is. And so perfect symmetry is not beautiful, at least a human conception. And I want to talk about how the human beings come into play in this book, because we live. I guess
that's another theme in music. You don't play this. You do theme with variations, and that enriches the thing, right?
Yeah, and counterpoint and so forth. Yes, I say the only instrument I play is the iPhone. That's the only one I'm competent in playing. Hi, everybody. Just a quick break to remind you to subscribe to my newsletter at briankeating.com, and also like, subscribe, leave a review, an asterism, a constellation of stars ranging from 1 to 5. I hope on the 5 side, but it's up to you if you think I could do better. I read each and every one. Here, I'll read one right now just to prove to you that I do read each and every review that I am blessed to get by you, my listening audience. So here's a recent one that I got. Brian Keating is a schmuck. No, that is not. That's from Mom. How could you do that? That's awful. But no, this is a hidden gem, a wonderful resource. This is a review. This is given by, I don't see the name, but I do read all the names. Another one is by someone named Sib Kanak, and he or she says, no pretension or repetition to fear. Thank you, Sibanak. Brian is, as a podcaster, actually, he or she calls me Brain as a podcaster. Thank you, Sibanak. That's why I have that name, because people confuse me with someone with a brain. But Brian, as a podcaster and moderator, holds easily the balance between the known and the unknown in a way that socially engages the listener without insulting the intellect. A great discovery on my part. Thank you so much. Another one from Lalo San 16. Dr. Keating is a very well-prepared host that keeps the conversation professional and gives the welcoming sensation to the listeners. It takes time to read a lot of the research in books. By the way, I read every book. I read 52 books in the last year alone, and I loved every one of them. So thank you for that. Tyler says, Brian gets great guests, asks great questions, and is brave enough to speak to a wide variety of people and ask them questions that many in academia often shy away from. Thank you very much, everybody. I never shy away. I never dumb it down. And I always encourage academic freedom. So please do subscribe, leave a review. It really helps me. I'm trying to keep it ad-free for the time being, and I will do so if you guys continue to leave me some feedback and subscribe to the newsletter. So briankeating.com, there it is right there, and do me that wonderful favor. I appreciate it very much. And now back to the remainder of our conversation with the Nobelist mind of the Nobel Minds universe. No, there's many Nobel laureates that have come on and many that aren't. So it's quite a treat. But today, a special treat because it's the book launch for Frank Wilczek's Fundamentals. Pick up a copy. I'll have a link in the show notes, and you can get one yourself, and you will enjoy it. And it's a rather quick read, which I appreciate, having so many books to read, so many awesome guests coming up, and really just so blessed to run this podcast. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the show. I think another aspect of this book, we talked a little bit about that with Deepak Chopra and Leonard Malone now, is, kind of cosmic humility, that we're sort of in this, we're sort of at this geometric mean between the largest scales in the universe, or I don't know, exponential, logarithmic geometric mean maybe between the largest scales in the universe and the smallest scales.
In some ways. Yeah.
Is that, sort of, as Galileo pointed out, animals can only be so large. You can't have an elephant the size of, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Is that just an accident? Is there some anthropic, kind of correlation? You talk about the variety of scales as another type of fundamental property of our universe. Can you talk more about that?
Well, it's complicated, and I think it's time dependent. But yes, the scale, the size that we are, is we're in a very sweet spot. Actually, we are large enough to comprehend a very large number in the objective sense, much larger than one, of independent processing units, neurons, that are themselves complicated and stable, so they're composed of zillions of, to speak scientifically, zillions of atoms and molecules.
You heard it here. Nobel laureate uses zillions.
And they support complex patterns and information processing that we call mind. And yet, we don't exhaust. No one of us, or even humanity as a whole, does not come close to exhausting the resources of the physical universe. We're here on this little planet inside a modest solar system, inside an average galaxy, inside a huge universe, and maybe a multiverse on top of that. Maybe. So we're both large in the sense of having enough independent complexity, programmable complexity, if you like, or dynamic complexity to support very rich experience and information processing and all the wonderful things that come with being human. And yet there's a lot left over, so that in the future, the vanguard of intelligence can keep expanding. And now we get into the dreams of science fiction, like Olaf Stapledon of galactic brains and things, which, of course, are still the future and may take a long time to be realized, if ever. But we're in a sense, we're starting to get there. We're establishing the whole world as a communications network. I can talk to you across the continent I don't give it a second thought anymore. But I'm old enough to remember when that was not remotely a possibility. When it was, Now
you have a studio. Now you've got your own home studio.
Right. That's right. We can send out robots that are complex and actuators to different planets and explore them. And we have intimate, and it's going to get better and better. I've had some out-of-body experiences controlling robots in other places and being embodied and having conversations with people. And it's a transporting experience, literally, you can feel. And I think the idea of distributed intelligence, both as a continuation of sort of individual human identity, but also kind of a group consciousness, is on us. It's going to flourish, and so we're not limited by the size of the human body. I guess that's all I wanted to touch on. We are very big, we are also very small, and we're growing. Those are the 3 points, I think. That
Right. And the universe is growing too. Although, given your diet and your loss of weight, you're shrinking and I'm growing. But we're conserved. I'm conserving the amount of mass between you and me.
My shell is getting smaller, but my brain is getting bigger.
That's the most efficient packing mechanism. I actually talked to astronaut Jessica Meir not too long ago, and she said not only are women, kind of better suited to go into space because they have a higher strength to weight ratio, especially in space, but they actually have slower metabolisms, so that makes them more efficient consumers of energy. And I'm thinking, but their brains might work a lot faster than our brains as men. And so, yes, there might be a triple threat for women to. So hopefully, she'll be the first woman to set foot on the moon. She's an amazing person. I want to ask you a question that I've always wanted to ask you. You're a theorist. You delve into the observational consequences of your theories. What is the most beautiful experiment, or maybe one or two experiments, that you've ever seen in the history of, let's say, modern physics? Let's not go back to, Cavendish or whatever. Let's stay with modern physics, last 100 years or so.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask about the things that came out of my theories. Well, let me start with those anyway.
I will. Okay, go ahead. Start with those.
Because there's a personal element to it, and I don't want to give up on that right away.
Yeah, okay.
But then I'll come back to the most beautiful period. So to me, the two most beautiful experiments that kind of spoke to me on a personal level, because they came out of my work in some sense, are seeing jets in QCD, where you almost literally see the Feynman diagrams that we calculated with quarks and gluons and antiquarks, not as individual particles, but you see their tracks as where you see several actual particles moving fast in the same direction. And so it plots out a flow of energy and momentum that tracks the properties of the underlying quarks and gluons. And it is incredible. I mean, I remember distinctly as a graduate student playing with these Feynman diagrams and doing the algebra and the idea that this would actually be a tangible, almost like a map of the physical world is just mind-boggling, and but there it is. And so that's one beautiful kind of experiment. And the other was much more recent, kind of a bookend to the beginning, and so far the latest chapter of my career was the Enneon discovery, where the Enneon observation, where we predicted that in a certain state of matter, the emergent particles would have some peculiar kind of memory that if you have one and what another one winds around it, that affects its behavior. And this summer, June or July, an experiment was done that actually saw this behavior, and it would take a bit of patience on my part, and also more important on your audience's part, to fully explain it. But you see certain curves that have discontinuities when one or two or three, it's an integer number of these funny particles that fall into your trap, and each time they do, you see a change in the behavior that's discontinuous, and it's extraordinarily beautiful. And the experimentalists did a good job of false coloring and sort of presentation of their data, so it just leaps to the eye, and it's just an extraordinary correspondence between reality and theoretical understanding that was very beautiful. So now going back to so those are the two for me, in my personal experience, that have just, sent me into a different state of consciousness. Mm-hmm. I was walking on air when I saw for several days when I saw these things. I never fully came down. But if I think about the most beautiful kind of phenomenon that sort of is, I don't want to go back to ancient history or so, and it's hard to not take that for these things for granted, like Newton's laws of gravity and so, or even general relativity. So novelty is also an element of beauty. And to me, the most beautiful kind of experiment that emerged from 20th century physics is the Josephson effect, the Josephson effects, that are these extraordinary manifestations of behavior of matter in a superconducting state when you have little insulating layers between two superconductors. So something you would never, ever stumble onto without profound understanding and intuitions about the behavior of matter when quantum mechanics dominates its behavior, and really stunningly surprising behavior that a constant voltage gives rise to a non-constant current. And then as the icing on the cake, so it's rooted mathematically in deep principles of gauge symmetry and sort of quantum mechanics at its most raw, basic, fundamental level, and it's led to an important technology, a very important technology that I don't think is exhausted yet.
No, we use it in all of our detectors in cosmology.
Yes, right. So that to me may be the most beautiful.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's coming up on about 60 years of Josephson effect. For me, it's the Aharonov-Bohm effect, because it's so strange that this thing that we ascribe almost no reality to in classical physics, then not only seems to have a reality in physics as a whole, but also in quantum physics. And they're not unrelated, I suppose, to the Josephson effect, where it's a phase-dependent effect.
But it's also not unrelated to it's very related to anyons.
Yes. So can we take a little break, because it's not so often I get a chance to ask someone of your stature the most basic questions of life. So when you think of these things, is it that you are kind of, is it that fortune favors a prepared mind? Is it that you worked so hard as a young person and you paid your dues and you put in your 100,000 hours and then all of a sudden these ideas just flow to you? Are you an idea machine? What is your kind of a secret? Is there anything that we can learn from you? Let me just put it that way. Is there any habitual?
I think I love to learn things, and then so it's not work for me. And I've always been kind of a sponge of absorbing. I'm not so good at systematically saying, "Oh, I'm going to study this," and then without how should I say, without loving it already. But I fortunately for me, for my career, I love a lot of ideas and then just dig deeper. And I've been very fortunate in going to the right schools and meeting some very great thinkers that I was in resonance with, all the way from Bertrand Russell to Herman Wilde to David Gross, and each time learning something new and a different, and Einstein and Feynman, and Darwin. You
didn't meet Darwin though, right?
No, I didn't meet Darwin. No.
You're like the youngest Nobel Prize winner that
nor did I meet. I didn't meet Einstein either. Although he died when I was 4 years old or something. Right. So I could have met him. But
I have a colleague here who did meet him. Lyman Spitzer's son is a professor here, Nick Spitzer at UC San Diego, and he remembers seeing him, rowing in a rowboat, and Einstein, at the Institute for Advanced Study. I see you also working. Well, you do work
but I mentioned that I'm learning artificial intelligence and machine learning now in a serious way, and over the years I've maintained an amateur interest in that. I had an amateur interest in cosmology, so which I was able to heighten when it became clear that the emerging ideas in high energy physics could be used for cosmology. I had kind of an amateur interest in the rest of physics. That was not fundamental particles. But then when I realized that the insights that we were developing in particle physics could be applied to describe interesting new phenomena in matter, I educated myself more systematically in that. And so it's a combination of sort of general awareness of what's out there and occasional obsessions or sensed opportunities that I seize on. But so I think the thing, I can't speak for everybody, or even for anybody really except myself. But to me, it seems to me, looking at other people, one thing that separates my style from others is that I'm kind of an omnivore of ideas. I graze in all kinds of different directions.
But you're not a dilettante. There's a danger you could be a.
Oh no. Yeah. No, I have a serial attention on that goes. When I don't think I'm a dilettante.
That's just what a dilettante would say.
I put honest work into every single paper that I've written, and I've written a lot. Yeah. So I go very deeply, at least for the time I'm writing the paper. But I do have, as you say, for instance, in QCD, I have delved from time to time back in particular things like color superconductivity or well, notably color superconductivity, but also the phase structure of QCD and sort of cosmological implications of QCD. But basically, I abandoned the subject and as a subject in itself, and that's been my style. I do something, you might say, skim the cream, or do make a contribution that I'm happy with, and then move on to something else as well.
And you work with small groups, I would say. You don't tend to work in huge collaborations. Would you say that part of your success is your ability to focus, relatively, I always say laser focus is not actually correct. It's laser collimation. When people say laser focus, they mean laser collimation. But when you collimate your mind, is it best done by yourself or with a student or two? Seemingly, it's not with large groups.
I've worked in both ways. So I often, when I have a new idea, I share it with friends and things, and sometimes it resonates and results in a collaboration. There have been several occasions where it's worked the other way, where some people have brought me into their investigations, and if I feel like if it sparks my imagination, I participate. If it doesn't, then I don't. So usually, it really only usually sparks my imagination if it's something I've been at least close to thinking about, or related to things that I have been thinking about. I'm always looking for new adventures, I guess, is the short way to say.
But I also see you as communicating.
Some of them are self-generated, but self-generated means based on reading that I've done, or annoyances that I felt about the way things should be and aren't, but also sparked by conversations with colleagues, sometimes by colloquia or seminars and things. My mind is open, as Erdos used to say.
That's right. Erdos said that, and he also said when they took away his amphetamines for a month, he said that you set back the progress of mathematics by 1 month. But I know that's not a problem for you. I do want to close out by talking a little bit in the book. One of the things that really resonates with me in your writing and in your speaking is that you have a courage, and I think, for scientists nowadays to even mention something from the Gospel of Mark, I mean, it shouldn't take courage to do that, but you do it. And I wonder, when you write things in the book, you quote from Matthew and Mark, and you quote, these other kind of astonishing things, from theistically inclined individuals, shall we say. But I am, as you know, I call myself, I was an altar boy in the Catholic Church, but I'm born as a Jew and I practice as a Jew. I'm not afraid to do it.
I have a bit of that too, actually.
Of Jewishness?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought you were Polish Catholic.
Well, I was, but, a lot of Polish Catholics weren't entirely Catholic by choice, or it was complicated.
Yeah.
And my paternal grandfather was Jewish.
Oh, wow.
We think. Yeah. And he didn't practice in any way either Catholicism or Judaism, but that's another story.
That's not uncommon. That's probably more common with Jews than almost anybody. But my question is, does religion inform you in any way? I read the Bible every day. I read a section of it, of the Old Testament only, because it's part of the Jewish tradition. We read the whole Torah, the Old Testament, once per year. And every day there's 1/7 of a weekly portion that we read. And so for me, I always look to it and I say, is this scientific? I wrestle with it. Is this not scientific? And I remember this conversation I had with Milad now, not too long ago. And we were talking about Stephen Hawking's famous book, A Brief History of Time, which when I read it, I didn't understand. I was only 17 or something when it came out, 18, 16. But now I understand it really well. And I understand what he was trying to do in that book, which was really to make the case for God's existence not necessary, not to invalidate God's existence, but he talked about the two reasons for God would be to establish the laws of nature, basically establish the laws of nature as well, and the laws of physics, by which he meant that, but really also to establish the universe as a whole. And what he said was, God could be avoided the necessity of starting the universe if the Hawking-Hartle conjecture is true, the no boundary conjecture. And that was really the basis of the book, Frank. I urge you to read that book again, because he's really saying that is not controversial, and it still is controversial. But the second thing he says is...
Of course, well, yeah, okay. I would say it's not even controversial, but that's another question.
That's right. That's what Pauli used to say, not even wrong. But
right.
But then he said that M theory in the grand design with Leonard Mlodinow, he says that M theory provides the conditions for the laws of nature. And so in both instantiations of God's necessity, it's no... Now, again, I am a practicing devout agnostic. I'm agnostic as they come, but I think it's important to wrestle with these. What does your study, your knowledge of religion, what does it do something? Does it satisfy something in you that your equations cannot? Is it just philosophy? What is religion to you?
I mean, let me first say that I do not adhere to any established religion.
Right.
I was when I was growing up into my early teen years, I was absolutely fascinated and deeply steeped in Roman Catholicism, which I was exposed to. So a lot of my cultural heritage is from that. And so that's why I refer to it, because it's part of my intellectual furniture, so to speak. And I still have a lot of respect and admiration for that tradition. It's quite flawed, it's quite complicated and human, but it contains some very beautiful things, and broadly considered, the whole Judeo-Christian tradition is part of who we are if we grow up as you and I did in the 20th century and 21st century United States. It is. It's everywhere around us, and so it's part. It's to ignore it or minimize it or attempt to how should I say, stigmatize it, or it's like cutting off your arm or doing a lobotomy of part of you lose a lot if you do lose that cultural reference, and there are things about getting around in the world and making sense of it that science doesn't answer. I very much agree with David Hume's analysis that no amount of thinking about what is can lead to a logical inference about what ought to be, or how we ought to behave, or what's right. So it can give you insight about the consequences of different choices and lead to a kind of wisdom at that level, but it can't ultimately decide what you want to do or what's right or what's good or what's bad.
Right.
Those are different categories. And people have thought about those things for a long time, gathered a lot of experience, and a lot of that is in traditions, and including religious ones. So I mean, this is a rambling answer, but so I think it's not a good idea to just ignore or dump on or trivialize those traditions. I think in the spirit of complementarity, you can learn from them,
right,
and also relate better to people who come from different perspectives if you take it seriously and try to understand what they're thinking about. But to me, sort of the approach to those questions that's proved most sympathetic and fulfilling in the long run, to me, is to understand God through God's works, to understand what it's all about, what it all means, by first understanding what it is, and then that teaches you a lot about those other questions. Certainly, is background knowledge you should have to approach them with the seriousness they deserve, and so that's what I've been trying to do, and that's certainly what I try to convey in Fundamentals.
Yeah. Towards the end of the book, we're coming to the end of the conversation. I know you've got a lot of media appearances from your home studio, the reporters outside, but I do want to cover a couple things. And you promised me an answer last time to a question I ask all my guests when we spoke in November, and so I want to get to that question in just a second. But before we go there, the book kind of, I hate it when authors are asked to, summarize your entire book so the audience doesn't have to buy the book or the audio book. So I will listen to this book. I have a copy of the book, obviously, and maybe we'll give a copy away to one of my listeners, depending on how you feel. I'd love to get a signed copy someday. But I do want to ask you, at the end of the book, you talk about complementarity, and right before that, you talk about complexity and emergent complexity. I spoke to your crosstown rival, Avi Loeb, last week about his new book called Extraterrestrial. And he talks a lot in that book about this technology that he believes visited our solar system back in 2017. But a good portion of the book, you find that astonishing? What's that? Are you there?
I said, "Oh my gosh!"
Yes.
Yeah, I'm there.
That's what he says. He says, "Yes."
Maybe it was the extraterrestrials. Well,
the first thing I want to ask you,
their beams or something.
Yeah, the first thing I want to do is ask you about that. Not that hypothesis. You'll have to read the book as I did. But if complexity is an emergent property of the universe. First of all, do you believe there is that there will be found evidence for extraterrestrial intelligence? Is there a preponderance of evidence? Is that unanswerable? And second of all, would they have structures like religion and extraterrestrial civilizations if they do exist? If complexity is a fundamental feature of the universe?
Yes. Well, okay. To the first question, of course. Well. Okay, unless there's something I don't know about, there doesn't seem I'd say the situation is we don't have direct evidence for any kind of extraterrestrial intelligence. However, to me, the probabilities are overwhelming. There's a kind of a lot of circumstantial reasons to suspect that it should be abundant, and it's not a paradox that we haven't seen it because it's far away and difficult to communicate. And also, when I say it's abundant, I should say what it is. Okay, so here on Earth, we know that as soon as the conditions became not crazy, so to speak, as soon as the Earth began to solidify and cool down and have a reasonable degree of stability and form liquid oceans and so forth, it didn't take very long for a life to emerge. And also, the chemistry is complicated, but not crazily complicated to get life started. So I believe it's very likely that life would start on a large number of the kinds of planets that people are discovering now, extrasolar planets, in great abundance. So they're not a rare thing. They're, again, zillions of them in the galaxy. So we have many billions, probably, of potential.
I believe the precise term is gajillion. Gajillion, Frank.
Gajillion. In our galaxy, and then of course there are lots and lots of galaxies. So I do think that life is abundant in the universe. However, again, consulting the history of life on Earth, which it took a long time for multicellular life to emerge, and it took kind of special conditions of stability and kind of having a nice star that has a leisurely evolution, and an orbit that's precisely circular, and a moon to kind of stir things up and play tech. There seem to, although we can't say what it would have happened if any of these things hadn't been in place. It does seem that it seems to me that the step from simple life, which is sort of at the level of glorified chemistry, to multicellular forms, is a difficult step. And on Earth, that took a long time.
Right.
That took billions of years. And then on top of that, to get from there to something we called intelligence, that we would recognize as human level intelligence. It's only been realized in humans, basically, with use of language and abstract concepts and so forth. And of course, the growth of technology is only about 200 years old, and embodied a lot of contingencies, such as wiping out the dinosaurs.
Right. I call that the hard problem of the whale.
So I think extraterrestrial intelligence and extraterrestrial technology might be rare, even though extraterrestrial life is common.
Yeah.
But I don't know. This is very difficult speculative stuff. I do.
Right. No, I agree, and that's why it's so surprising that Avi is so convinced with high certainty that this was alien technology. And I didn't ask him this question, but
alien technology in the sense of physical objects that they throw into our vicinity seems to me extraordinarily far-fetched. That's a very inefficient way. It's a very inefficient way to explore the universe, to throw physical objects around. It takes a very long time.
Well,
why do it? And you have to know where to throw it, and so it seems a priori so far fetched that.
Well, that's what he said. You would say.
I can't.
That's what he said.
I find it hard to get excited about UFOs or whatever. On the other hand, there's Arthur C. Clarke's third law, that says that any sufficiently advanced technology looks like magic. So who am I to say what some advanced civilization might be doing? But I'd need to see pretty good evidence to start thinking along those lines.
You'll see that in his book. You'll see that in the podcast about his book, which will come out confusingly after this podcast comes out. But yes, the saying by Arthur C. Clarke is how we open this podcast, with his actual voice. You'll hear it when you listen to the podcast tomorrow. But I do want to say, in that context, first of all, he doesn't believe that it was necessarily targeting Earth. He thinks it's sort of either space junk, space debris, but it was a solar sail. I don't want to get into that too much, but just to say that Elon Musk right now is preparing.
But yeah, all right. Well, this is definitely a diversion from our main themes.
Yeah, I mean, the question.
Let's just say remarkable if true.
That's right. Astonishing, even if false. But yes, I talk about this in the context. I brought it up in the context of, is complexity fundamental? If complexity is fundamental, as you assert, and kind of religion is sort of a superstructure built upon, the culture of the evolved citizens.
I think. I think complexity is we proved it. We are it. We are the proof, really, that complexity is a complexity that can support mind, is an emergent property of matter under the right conditions. So to me, that's not a hypothesis. That's just a fact, and we prove it in ourselves. We also prove it with our constructions.
Right.
But I wouldn't say it's a fundamental feature of matter, though. It's in the sense of fundamental we discussed, that can't be understood in terms of more basic principles. The more basic principles of quantum field theory and things like that themselves refer to complexity, but they turn out to empower complexity.
Mm-hmm. We talked about with Leonard Mlodinow and Deepak Chopra in our chat called Fundamentally Closer to Truth, which is on my podcast channel and on Deepak Chopra's Chopra Well. We got into this kind of meandering conversation about free will and so forth. And I don't really want to revisit that, but I do want to say that, at some point we were debating, if you could know the wave function, for a given, for a human being, then you could predict basically with absolute certainty how he or she would interact with the world. And I found it very frustrating because that presupposes a bunch of things, such as, we understand the wave function of the person, we understand the wave function of the universe, we understand the apparatus. Yes. As you make a point in this book, precision and precision is sort of complementary.
Precision and human comprehensibility.
Yeah. So you have to like alter the system to make a precise. The more you want precision in your measurements, the more you have to interact with it. So how could you possibly? Anyway, I was on your side in that, but I want to ask you a question. I've had debates with people like Sean Carroll and so forth about religion, about the multiverse, etc., wherein you'll hear things like, well, before the universe existed, even your co-author, Lawrence Krauss and you have done written papers together. He'll say, well, the laws of physics, allow for a multiverse, therefore the multiverse can occur. But I want to ask you, can we ever know things like where the wave function of the universe came from? Or Sean Carroll says, well, there's a Hilbert space and that's all you need. Okay, that's great, but where did the Hilbert space come from? Are these like the same kind of frustrating, stupid questions that I asked you about free will, or are these fruitful avenues for discussion? Because sometimes, the best part is knowing when to say no.
Yes. You got to know when to say no. Yeah. This really goes back to the discussion we had earlier about how I decide what to work on. And some questions are more fruitful than others. Any bum on the street can say, what's it all about? And what's the meaning of it all? And okay, yeah. And I wouldn't call them bums, but we've had a long history of philosophers who, even some that are highly regarded and still studied that, to me, have had discussions that are kind of so vague and so meandering that they don't lead anywhere. So pseudo-profound, I would say. But that doesn't mean there aren't legitimate questions that are of great interest around those issues. It's just a matter of separating the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah. When you look at when you think about things like the sort of impossible to answer questions that we should have just said, citation Descartes, 1687, he needs to boost his H index a little bit. But I guess, what fascinates me about your work is that you don't shy away from the big questions, but you're actually really keen on answering, particular questions. And in fact, you say in the book, if there's justice in the universe, we will find, axions. Can you tell me what do you mean? Are you serious? Do you feel like that's, kind of like Einstein said, if what's that?
I'm not serious that it's justice. I mean, no one will be guilty of any crime if axions are not the dark matter. But I just mean it would be a pity if so much circumstantial evidence from nature, were misleading. So it's sort of a vast cosmic joke. I think, I'd like to think that God has better taste than that to mislead us that way. But some ideas. I mean, this is something I've felt several times in my career that's such and such an equation, such and such an idea is too beautiful not to be true. And mostly that's been correct. But we're still waiting for proton decay. We're still waiting for low energy supersymmetry. So sometimes things that I thought, if there's any justice in the world, they should happen. At least they haven't happened yet. And
I wanted to, because in your previous book, in A Beautiful Question, you say, I think supersymmetry will be found within the next 5 years. I think we're about year 4.5. So I want to make a bet. I want to make some bets with you, Frank, maybe offline.
No, I'm afraid that's when it seems, how should I say, no more bets are being taken on that one.
All right, what about Axions? Would you like to make a bet?
The LHC has more or less exhausted, not quite, but close to, I would say, having exhausted its potential for discovering low energy supersymmetry, and there's nothing on the horizon in the near future that's going to be able to address that question more closely.
Right. Well, I want to
Axions, on the other hand, we're just now getting into the sophistication and power of technology to make a serious try at detecting them.
So I wanted to offer a bet with you, Frank. I want to offer a bet that we buy each other the largest stuffed mascot of each other's university. In 5 years, I will give it to you if Axions are not discovered, and you will give it to me if Axions are discovered. So no matter what, we both win. Okay?
All right.
Do you accept that bet? All right, we have it on tape. So,
I need to know what the university is.
Oh, UC San Diego.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. I didn't say tuition. I didn't say you have to pay tuition for my kids, but all right, you get me a giant stuffed beaver if it is detected, and I get you a giant stuffed Triton. Okay, I'm going to finish up.
So that's where you got your degree?
Oh, no. I meant our current university.
Oh, our current university. Oh, okay. That's fine. Either way, it's fine.
So you'll get me a giant stuffed beaver. Yes, if
All right.
And I'll get you a stuffed Triton, which I don't even know what that is, but anyway, I'll get it for you. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about just before we wrap up is your work with one of your students or postdoc. I can't pronounce his name. He's of European extraction, and it's about detecting the quantum nature of gravitational waves using.
Well, okay, that's with Malik Parikh, who was a student of mine, and George Zaharide, who's a student of his, I think, or a postdoc with him.
Great.
Yes.
Where is that? What is the status of that, and why is it important to establish the quantized nature of gravity for us to understand the nature of the fundamentals of reality?
Well, I would have said before we got involved in this that it's important to show because various people have doubted it, and well, it's always important to
do things for spite.
Establish that things you think are true actually are true in the world. I mean, you can be surprised, obviously, and people. But in the course of this investigation, I think I came to realize, we came to realize, that the classical treatment of gravitational radiation, really not just in principle, but in reality, is fundamentally flawed. Is fundamentally flawed is too strong. It's fundamentally limited. We know quantum mechanics governs the world. I think most people who are qualified to pronounce on the question think so. And we know that there is such a thing as gravity, and we know that there is such a thing as gravitational waves. And so it behooves us to put that phenomenon in the framework of quantum mechanics, in the framework of our understanding of the rest of the world. And that's been done in the literature, of course. You have to do that in order to design LIGO and detectors and think about them. but it's basically been making assumptions about the nature of gravitational waves, which reduce them to a classical phenomenon. We could discuss the technicalities, but basically that's the message. And I now think that is severely limited. That's very misleading as regards the last moments of black hole mergers, where the equations become nonlinear. And I think the gravitational waves during that period will not be well described as classical. And so originally the motivation was kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and just showing that it could be done consistently. Now I think there's actually new ground to be broken.
Wow. Yeah, I was very curious about that, because I think, there's this notion that gravity has to be quantized, and even, part of this, theory of everything, which is what I want to close up talking about. Why are there so many theories of everything? I mean, I get 2 emails a week about a theory of everything.
Well, that's because there isn't a theory of everything.
But so I always point out I never get emails.
I should be more careful. I was going to say, fools rush in where angels fear to tread.
Okay. Yeah, that's less. Yeah, good job, Frank. That's less controversial than
even by. Well, first of all, let me clarify this whole. I really dislike this phrase "theory of everything," because what people are really talking about is, I think it's much better to a much better version of that is what Weinberg calls it, a final theory. But first of all, so a final theory would be an account of the fundamental laws of nature, which we could argue about exactly what that encompasses. Does it encompass the Big Bang? Does it encompass initial conditions, or just the laws of how things evolve in time? But okay, let's leave that question vague for the moment. A description that's everywhere we check it in experiments is correct, and there's no phenomenon that we have observed that's left out of it, and that it has a kind of logical closure. It's so beautiful and so difficult to imagine changing in a consistent way that it becomes a final theory. People lose motivation to try to do better. This is it, as far as fundamental laws of nature are concerned, because it's battle tested, doesn't seem to be ready, doesn't seem to be open to change, and it seems to be complete. Mm. So that would be a final theory of fundamental physical law. It would not be a theory of everything. It would not be a theory of much of anything, really. It wouldn't be a theory of the history of Sweden, or or the description of human beings or their behavior, or lots of things that we think of as part of everything. Most people would say everything about everything. Okay, but a final theory we have a fairly close approximation to that, I would say, in our core theory or standard model of how the strong, weak, and electromagnetic interactions work, and then how it fits together with gravity and works with quantum mechanics. And for purposes of engineering, for biology, for chemistry, for physics, for most of physics, and most of astrophysics, everything except a few corners of cosmology, those laws have that character. They are complete. They are battle tested. They are very difficult to change. And okay, so we have a model, and we have also ideas about unification, and vaguer ideas about string theory that might take it further and get an even better approximation to a final theory. So that's what it means. I think somehow that rambling discussion included the answer to your question.
Yes,
but if
I
not,
think
maybe we can find it.
Yes,
So
yeah. I only like
so I think we might achieve a theory, a final theory. It would not deserve the name of a theory of everything, and we're not. And in my opinion, we're not all that close. We have achieved it in a certain practical sense. I don't think we're very close to it in a philosophical sense. I think there are too many open issues and loose ends to say that we certainly. I mean, Hawking's claim that M theory is a final theory, which is essentially what he's claiming, is just silly.
Yeah,
it's not.
Yeah.
It's not battle tested. Mm-hmm. It has not made concrete predictions about physical phenomena, let alone a complete set of predictions.
Right.
So that's just silly. But but one could imagine improving what we have now so it deserves the name of a final theory. As I said, we do have a final theory for many practical purposes, but that does not mean it's a theory of everything.
Yeah.
It's a theory of, it's a foundation maybe for
the core
understanding the physical world, but it does not treat questions of emergence or creativity or the actual objects that exist around us.
Yeah. No, I think that's a beautiful way to phrase it in a way that is actually radically not controversial, because I think you're right.
But it raises a lot of people's hackles because they're invested in glamorizing their work, or which.
Well, I always say, I get a lot more emails. I've never gotten an email that says, Boltzmann was wrong. Let me show you how. It's always Einstein was wrong or Wilczek is wrong.
Yes.
Not both. But let me just close out that last section before I get to the final questions by saying I never get emails about an experiment of everything. And one of the most beautiful things in A Beautiful Question to me was that you talk about ways that scientists in the early 18th century, like Isaac Newton, were testing things that would eventually become part of the core theory, namely the wave-like and particle-like nature, different manifestations of matter and light. For example, the continuity of the rainbow, of the spectrum. And it reminded me of Richard Feynman said, if an alien civilization exists and they're intelligent, they should be able to predict that sometimes we see rainbows in our atmosphere.
Yes.
Because it's based on physical laws. It wouldn't necessarily really reveal how we feel when we see a rainbow, or what that rainbow has been interpreted by religions around the world. But it made me think that
what we are. We are. The hard part is we, not the rainbow, right?
Yes, right. And since as you pointed out, there's literally thought to be trillions of exoplanets. It always galls me a little bit when people say, there's probably 1 trillion planets just like the Earth in the history of the observable universe. And I'm like, don't we want to focus on our own galaxy first, before we go back 13 billion years to some galaxy that's that distance away in light years? Anyway, I want to ask you, are there kind of lurking hints at a final theory, at the final evolution of the core theory, perhaps in data that people haven't fully mined? When we look at, exoplanet data, there's tons of it out there, and we don't have enough time to analyze it. When we look at, Avi Loeb claims that when the Vera Rubin Observatory comes online, we'll find many of these Oumuamua-like objects. But that suggests to me that maybe there's data in the LHC or in CERN or in Fermilab data or in some very, very, in laboratory physics data, like you have shown with anyons, with quasi-particles, with topological insulators. Yeah. These are things that could have implications on a cosmological scale that nobody pays attention to and nobody writes me about. Professor Keating, I need $10,000 to do an experiment or to look and mine the data. Instead, it's let me come up with this theory of time like Julian Barber's doing now, who's going to come on the show. But why is it that we are not putting as much attention and looking at archival data for clues to even some of these grand concepts and issues that people are caring about?
you have to make a concrete proposal, I guess. But I do have some sympathy for the idea that there may be ways of analyzing either existing data or practical laboratory experiments, as opposed to thought experiments that would require thought accelerators that are not likely to appear, or thought black holes that we don't actually have access to.
There is a thought black hole, Frank. There is a thought black hole where ideas go to die. It's called Twitter. Yeah. Avoid it at all costs.
Right. So, but yeah. So I do have sympathy for the idea, and that there may be new ways of analyzing low energy phenomena that will reveal absolutely fundamental new insights. Well, concretely, I think the search for electric dipole moments of elementary particles is one. Of course, the search for axions is carried on through new kinds of antennas that ultimately are low energy observations. The quantum nature of gravitational waves, I think, is a matter of doing delicate processing of information and maybe setting up slightly different kinds of maybe not so slightly, but different antennas that are sensitive to entanglement and sort of more subtle aspects of radiation fields. So yeah, I do think there's a lot of room for creativity. Yeah. On the other hand, just because the core theory does have the property of kind of closure, it's very difficult to change its basic principles without ruining it. And the ways you can change it tend to be things that are very challenging to probe experimentally, sort of. In a way, we're the victims of our own success. In a way, we've understood so many kinds of experiments and managed to construct this theory that describes them so well that it's very hard to improve. But maybe there'll be some marvelous surprise.
Yeah.
That I haven't envisaged.
Now, yeah, as upcoming guest Nima Arkani Hamed says, it's very difficult to break, the standard model, the core theory. It's very hard to disturb it in such a way that you can make fruitful predictions that are novel, and right. In a way that the core theory almost has an intelligence, a resilience that makes it very hard to break. Okay, I want to wrap up because I know you've got a million things to do today.
Because it's based on profound principles. So unless you want to define somehow renounce one of the profound principles, it seems to be very difficult to change. You can augment it. You can add things to it that also embrace the profound principles, and axions are an example of that.
Yeah.
And certainly you can derive new phenomena from it. It's the people haven't exhausted its content. For heaven's sake, people haven't exhausted the content of the integers. People just proved Fermat's last theorem. So, so there's a lot more to be drawn out of it. But as to changing it in really basic ways that change its profound principles, that seems to be really tough because it works.
Yeah. Yeah, you break it, you bought it, right? I want to thank you for many things, for being an inspiration to many of us in the world, both in the sciences and outside of the sciences. This book is a gateway drug into the mind of Frank Wilczek. It is a book full of meaning. And actually, the laws of physics describe what the world is, but I think the way that you look at it gives a sort of prose, but infused with the way a scientist should look at the world. And I found it very beautiful, very moving, almost emotional at some points. And I want to thank you for being vulnerable and also courageous, as I know you always are. So thank you for sharing so much of your time. Good luck with the book.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to
Thank
you
you.
again soon
Okay.
when your murder mystery comes out.
Till next time.
Yes.
Till next time. I hope this isn't. I'm sure there'll be many next times. Okay. It's a joy.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Frank.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.